And some of them reported to me suicides of Muslim men, which was something that in my work as a social worker, Muslim men, I think, or any community, it's a very personal subject, and they talked about that. I don't know if the cause was Islamophobia. I think it was a context of a lot of occurring things. It was deeply, deeply troubling to hear that. One of the most powerful things about the research that we did, and the data was similar, Argentina was a little different, so I'll tell you about that in a second, was the worry about the children, the worry about the parents had about the future of their children, their daughters, their brothers and sisters. Will they have the same opportunities that I have had, that you have had? Or is that going to be taken away? And that's deeply, deeply concerning for many families. The trauma of the re-victimization of media and watching over and over again when an event happens and it being replayed. I was listening, I went to an Islamophobia conference in Toronto, Canada recently. It was organized by a couple of universities, and Reza Aslan was speaking, and I was struck by something he said. He's a well-known commentator on many channels on televisions, and he said fighting media, dealing with Islamophobia is so difficult because media is a for-profit industry, and obviously they want you to watch, and it's almost a never-ending battle. There was collective sadness, which was another theme that came out, and the grief that we had in the interviews, I have to say, as researchers, the team of us, I was the only Muslim, we literally, I remember after the interviews, I remembered cried in our cars because we had not been prepared for that type of grief. And it was, I think it was the trauma and just sharing it and having witnesses to it. And I talked about this recently in a talk somewhere that, you know, when terrorism happens, violent extremism, you know, one of the things that people often didn't have with us was it's so important to have witnesses when you're grieving, when something happens, but it was like our grief was not good enough, or our grief didn't count, and our grief wasn't open. So our grief was never really acknowledged or even honored. And as social workers, we look at death. Grief often also needs witnesses and ritual healing. But when we tried to go to places where things had happened, where terrorism happened, we were almost not part of that ritual, or people were afraid. So I think there's a lot when it comes to mental health and the stages of grief, as Kubler-Ross talks about. You can read some of these quotes. I think as I reflect on where we are today and what we have to do, the courage that it takes to do the type of research that many of you are doing and to document this is enormous, because it's not easy, because we're almost doing storytelling of us, because we're also living it. So it's profound, and the burnout rate for some of us in this field, I think a study to look at the burnout rate or the impact that it has on us, I think would be fascinating for a dissertation. Here's one of the quotes of one of the interviews. We had a television in our office, so I went to look at it, and my colleagues who were in the office with me kind of moved away, and the supervisor pointed at the screen and she said, "Do you see that?" I said, "What happened?" She said, "Some Muslims blew up the Twin Towers," and I looked at her startled. She said, "You're kidding me." She said, "No, I'm not kidding you. You Muslims blew up the Twin Towers." And that narrative of sort of being responsible, there was a speaker from Australia speaking the other day, being guarded of what we say, how we say. My own husband, Larry, said to me, "Is this being video streamed?" And I said, "Possibly." He goes, "You know, even about this, somebody might twist your words, and that's what we live with as researchers. But I mean, if we don't talk about the trauma or what's happening, we've lost. And we have to do this, and we have to do it proactively. One of the most profound experiences in my research with this incredible team, and I'm summing up a complex study, was I had the opportunity to meet the parents of Peter Kasich. Peter Kasich was kidnapped by ISIL and ISIS and held for a number of years. The parents couldn't even talk about it. And he was an amazing fellow from Indiana. He was a peace activist, and he was in Syria to help the Syrian people. And when I met the mother and the father, before he was videotaped and killed, the mother and the father looked at me, and I was one of the first Muslims they met, the father told me. And so were the two men next to me. And I looked at the father, and I have to say this to you, and the mother, and I'll never see their eyes. And this is another kind of trauma. To watch what is happening to our faith in a minority. I'm from Nigeria. I grew up there. I've seen what Boko Haram did in my own community. I have ancestry originally from Syria. But to watch a mother and father look at me with such love after what had happened to their son was profound. And to get through this period, we cannot do it alone. We had a Syrian family that came to Indiana, and there was a lot of politics to stop them from moving. And the Archbishop, who was Catholic, stood up and said, no, we're going to have them. And I met the family, and a number of us did. And to deal with this movement effectively, I don't have the answer, but we have to have courage, and we have to work with the interfaith people, the Quakers, the different faith groups, the students or the people that have the courage to stand up, but often face cyberbullying personally, and the toll that it takes is not easy. In Indiana, we've had events in churches and different places where meet a Muslim. Ever met a Muslim? And they're packed. And people come because you're often afraid of what you don't know. So I think in dealing with the complex issue of trauma and mental health and coping strategies, one of the key things I think I've learned as a teacher is if you know one, you're less afraid. If you have dinner with them, if you have coffee with them. My own students told me recently, 98% of them said that if we never had you as a teacher, we would have been afraid of everyone like you. These were my students. And the interaction is so key. The images that people are constantly being hit up with. A team of us are writing a grant right now, and it'll be actually to look at the impact of the intense media coverage of violent extremism and the impact it's having on our younger adults. And we're excited about that, but we also know the storytelling may be difficult. It's not easy to talk about, what you're going through. From people changing names to women who've stopped wearing hijabs, or to women that have been saying, I am going to wear a hijab, I am going to be proud of who I am, to the people that have lost their voices or silenced their voices. It almost reminds me of, as a person who's investigated sexual assault, pedophiles, rapists, the silencing, it's that kind of oppression, and you have to speak up. One of the most troubling aspects of some of the research that we found was the impact on the elderly. And the parents that have children, or even myself, that are worried about their parents if they wear hijab or on the street, if they walk down an alley. And one quote by an elderly Muslim woman, she said, I feel like a prisoner in my own home whenever something happens, because the kids are so protective. And so the elderly are so fragile and so vulnerable. certainly we can't be invisible, and I'm so proud of the people having this conference. For the Muslims as well, with the intersectionalities and with the research that we found that were darker skinned, African American, they faced even more discrimination. There was also a sense, I think, in a lot of the data that we had about the Muslims that sounded like I do, but the Muslims that had the accents, that made a difference in the kind of discrimination that you faced. Certainly, I think you can't do this type of work without having hope, because I tell you honestly, it drains you. It really does. I think it does. But the positive thing about a lot of what has happened is, I think we're looking closer at our faith. We're having some of the dialogues, and we need to, some of the difficult conversations, and I don't think we should be afraid of it. We can't have one child joining ISIL or ISIS or Boko Haram. And because that one child or two children or whoever, wherever it is, impacts us here. It's impacting us. And we've got to counter the narrative. Certainly, the random acts of kindness by so many strangers who are not Muslims, from flowers, from driving people, from checking on people, are you okay when something happens, has been instrumental in dealing with some of the trauma. There are films, we know, that are being shown in many places, but it's much more about the films. It's certainly about the interactions. And one of the most important things I think I've learned as a teacher when it comes to social work is that having people actually do projects with communities they know little about or afraid of. And the two groups my students will often pick will be the gay community or the Muslim community, the group that they might be biased towards. And some of their own family members have said, don't go to that mosque. You might be converted, or there may be machine guns. But the students tell me it's been such a profound experience. I have a tremendous amount of hope. You give me hope. This conference gives me hope. And we have to continue. The students, I'm so proud of you, because you are doing something that will impact your children, will make us better as a country and as a world. I want to say one closing thing about Argentina. Argentina, and we collected data in Argentina, was kind of an outlier. Argentina didn't experience what Australia, Canada, and the United States did, which was fascinating to us. Why were the Muslims there going through that? And they have a significant Muslim population in Buenos Aires, but one of the things was the media didn't cover as much of what was happening. And so there is some narrative we have to deal with when it comes to media, but it's going to be a challenge. In closing, I'm just honored that we're talking about the mental health impacts. And I think we have to talk about the mental health impacts of researchers as well if we're going to continue this work successfully. Thank you, and God bless you.
Kasich, thank you for that honest and very authentic reflection.
Thank you.
Next we have Hamad.
Hi everyone, my name is Hamad. I'm a medical student here at UC Davis, about an hour and a half north of here. My partner in this has been Nabil Ali from Albany Medical College. Basically what I'm talking about today is a really simple topic. In fact, I'd argue that it's fairly intuitive, and I think because of that fact, it is extremely important. And it's really important because although it's easy to kind of grasp, it's not talked about very much, and more so it's not studied enough at all. And what the concept really is that mental well-being affects physical health. And that's something that we've looked at in medicine and in public health and in literature in a lot of different ways, looking at a lot of different communities. But particularly within the Muslim American community, it's something that really needs to be done. But to begin to get into that conversation, I think it's important for us to talk about health as a kind of a whole, and also the role that public health plays in introducing us to this entire context. So if you look at health, just as a very kind of broad word, the World Health Organization defines it as a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. So there's two important parts. The second kind of being where we can start at, where this is not simply not being sick. There's more to it than that. There's a sense of completeness, both in the physical, the mental, and the social. So I want you to hold on to that as we kind of go through this talk and get an idea of what it is that I'm leading up towards. And now, what is public health? And I think here lies a lot of misconceptions, and not, to be quite honest, I think even within the field, within healthcare as a whole, it's something that we're never really quite clear on. And I think what's important to understand is that medicine and public health are somewhat different. So public health, as defined by the Institute of Medicine, is talking about we as a society, what we as a society do collectively to assure conditions for people to be healthy. I recently talked to Dr. El-Said from Detroit about things. He likes to go about it a certain way, so I kind of want to walk us through it the way he does. So we break this up into parts again. So us as a society,